Greetings and welcome to another episode of Straight-Talk-About-Falun-Gong. In this episode I will critique the 2019 interview that host Stephanie Ruhle of fake news MSNBC conducted with two reporters from NBC News. Here are a few highlights from the interview. MSNBC's host Stephanie Ruhle, exclusive reporting from NBC News linking a Chinese spiritual group footing the bill for some of the biggest pro-Trump advertising on Facebook. The Epoch Times has spent more than $1.5 million on 11,000 pro-Trump advertisements in the last 6 months alone. Put in perspective, that is more than any organization outside the Trump campaign itself, even more than most Democratic presidential candidates have spent on their own campaigns. Tim Scott, I find it interesting that fake news MSNBC would give a hoot about what the Epoch Times does with its own money. If it wants to spend $1.5 million on 11,000 pro-Trump advertisements, then that's their business and their business alone. When Stephanie tries to put that $1.5 million into perspective for her viewing audience, she's implying that the Epoch Times is seemingly up to no good. MSNBC's host Stephanie Ruhle, joining me now, the reporters who wrote this extraordinary story, NBC's Ben Collins and Brandy Zarazinski. Tim Scott, you will see shortly that there is nothing particularly extraordinary about this news story whatsoever, except the juvenile, juicy, gossip-laden excitement that they all seem to be reveling in. It's as if they can barely contain their excitement when talking about the clever undercover work that Ben and Brandy did. NBC's Ben Collins, I know it's a very wild story, but here's the deal. So there's this group called Falun-Gong, and they run this thing called the Epoch Times. They send out physical mailers talking about the deep state and talking about how Hillary Clinton is part of a cabal sort of taking over the government. Tim Scott, it seems to me that Ben is skeptical about the existence of a deep state when virtually everyone on the planet knows this to be true. And yes, Hillary Clinton is in fact a part of the deep state which wants to take over the US government. There are no secrets here. The Epoch Times is simply further educating people on these important matters because the paper prints the truth. They are not beholden to any outside group, such as Big Pharma. NBC's Ben Collins, and the end goal of the spiritual group is to bring about a judgment day that will pit communists to hell and anyone who's sympathetic to them to heaven. Tim Scott, absolutely hilarious. Okay Ben, so you're saying that a group of people, Falun Gong practitioners, claim that they're going to bring about a judgment day. And how can mere mortals do such a thing? This is as absurd as it gets. There is no such thing as Falun Gong practitioners trying to bring about a judgment day. You just made this up out of thin air. Also, people don't go to heaven just because they are sympathetic to Falun Gong. I never heard of that in my life. Also, why didn't you bother to mention the names of the person who told you this nonsense? NBC's Ben Collins, and they think that Donald Trump is the guy helping bring that. Tim Scott, Donald Trump is a mere mortal, so he cannot help other mortals, like Falun Gong practitioners, bring about a judgment day. Do mere mortals get to decide things of such cosmic significance and magnitude? NBC's Brandy Zarazinski, so the Epoch Times looks like a regular conservative outlet because it just keeps getting crazier and crazier, the regular conservative ecosystem. But when you look behind it, you see it's non-profit. Tim Scott, almost all conservative people and their conservative views are crazy to Ben because he sees conservatives, as a whole, as being crazy. NBC's Brandy Zarazinski, but really the Epoch Times is a decades-old media arm of an anti-Chinese government propaganda outlet. Tim Scott, the Epoch Times is not a decades-old anti-Chinese government propaganda outlet. But if you insist that it is, why not provide even a tiny bit of proof in your interview? What you are doing here is speculating, which can hardly be considered good journalism. The Epoch Times is a conservative newspaper that prints the truth. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, has killed over 80 million of its own citizens through its various political campaigns, so who can say it has a virtuous past, or for that matter, a virtuous present? And why can't the Epoch Times tell people about the CCP's past and present evils? The world needs to know the truth about the CCP, and it appears that very few news outlets are willing to print that truth. Stephanie Ruhle, what does Facebook have to say about this? Let's say we looked at a different industry. Let's say this was investment banking and some foreign company that you didn't know calls up and says, "Yep, I want to do a massive transaction with you and pay you millions of dollars." The bank would have to say, "We're going to do a deep investigation in Know Your Client before I take your money." Tim Scott, first off, it's not millions of dollars, it is $1.5 million. Why would Facebook ever want to do a deep investigation into where the Epoch Times came into this money? Why would Facebook even care? NBC's Ben Collins, yeah, it's a really good point. And we thought about this too, all of this dark money. We don't even know how they're getting the money. We investigated this for 5 months. We still don't really know where this money is coming from. Tim Scott, and this is why MSNBC and NBC News are the kings of fake news. The assumption that these so-called journalists made here is that the Epoch Times ad money is in reality dark money, somehow illegally earned. But wait a blessed second. Didn't they say that they don't know where the Epoch Times money is coming from, after 5 months, but they do know for certain that it is, nevertheless, dark money? That is a horrible assumption that these NBC people made about the Epoch Times. It's so unprofessional. Why would it be incumbent of the Epoch Times to divulge such private information to another news outlet, especially a fake news outlet? Yet, MSNBC makes it appear like there is some dirty little secret that the Epoch Times is withholding from the public, when it is really nobody's business but their own. NBC's Brandy Zarazinski, they are a big player on the block now and nobody knows what's behind it. Tim Scott, I think it is smart of the Epoch Times not to share any information about its inner corporate workings with any fake news outlets, including MSNBC and NBC News. NBC's Ben Collins, yeah, the president's Facebook page shared their content 6 times. Donald Trump Jr. shared them a couple of times as well. So they are ingrained in that campaign. They're trying to ingratiate themselves into it. We'll see if that's actually what happens. Tim Scott, that's just another clumsy assumption on your part. What assumption? That the Epoch Times is trying to ingratiate themselves into the Trump campaign. Stephanie Ruhle, you spoke to former reporters there. What did they tell you? NBC's Brandy Zarazinski, well, that was really interesting. So usually the people that are working there are just Falun Gong volunteers. So they are people that practice the religion or the spiritual movement and they also work for the paper. That's part of their spirituality. They have to volunteer their time there. Tim Scott, not true. No one is forced to volunteer, or else it could not be called volunteer work, now could it? NBC's Brandy Zarazinski, but in 2016, the Epoch Times decided to hire from outside. So they brought in 7 new reporters that didn't practice. They put them in a locked room away from the rest of the newspaper staff and they had them churn out articles. So one of the former reporters said that it was almost like a Russian troll farm. Tim Scott, and what did the other 6 reporters say, and why did you only report on what one said? Is it because that one reporter aligned with your own agenda? Why didn't you mention that reporter's name, or did you just make this all up? No company would dare to lock its reporters up in a room. That's insane to even suggest such nonsense. NBC's Brandy Zarazinski, so that's what's happening behind the scenes here. Tim Scott, so Brandy and Ben spent 5 long months researching the Epoch Times and that is all they can come up with is a few sensationalized fake news bits over the course of a short 5-minute interview. Hardly a good use of their company's resources. In conclusion, let's review what these 2 NBC News reporters learned in 5 months of undercover work investigating the Epoch Times. 1. The Epoch Times spent $1.5 million of pro-Trump ads. Tim Scott, yes, and so what? 2. The Epoch Times sends out physical mailers talking about the deep state and talking about how Hillary Clinton is part of a cabal, sort of taking over the government. Tim Scott, both statements are 100% true, the deep state is very real and Hillary is part of the deep state. Most intelligent people in the world know this is true. 3. And the end goal of the spiritual group is to bring about a judgment day that will pit communists to hell and anyone who's sympathetic to them to heaven. Tim Scott, absolutely ridiculous. 4. Donald Trump will help bring about a judgment day. Again, absolutely ridiculous. 5. After 5 months of intense investigation of the Epoch Times, they still don't know where the Epoch Times money comes from, but they somehow know with absolute certainty that it is dark money. Tim Scott, a false assumption. 6. The Epoch Times is a big player on the block now and nobody knows what's behind it. Tim Scott, the assumption here is that the newspaper operates in the dark shadows. 7. The Epoch Times is trying to ingratiate themselves into the Trump campaign. Tim Scott, another false assumption. 8. The Epoch Times decided to hire outside reporters. Tim Scott, and so what? 9. The people who practice Falun Gong have to volunteer their time at the Epoch Times. Tim Scott, absolutely not true, as no one is forced to volunteer. And there you have it, folks. Somehow this is supposed to be exclusive reporting from NBC News. The bar has indeed been lowered in the world of fake news sensational hit piece journalism. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Wishing you a very bright day today, and an even brighter one tomorrow.